It wasn't the headlines or the lavish trips that broke Elton John's trust. It was a quiet disappearance of a borrowed Range Rover. The car, lent for a publicity appearance, was never returned, and with it went the illusion of mutual respect. While Meghan Markle and Prince Harry continued their high-profile media push, Elton was left to reconcile his generosity with what now felt like manipulation.
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
For someone who once stood firmly in their corner, the moment marked a shift. The missing vehicle wasn't about its value. It was about what it represented: disregard, entitlement, and a relationship no longer rooted in reciprocity. This unreturned car became a metaphor for everything that had gone wrong. Years of goodwill were quietly eroded by a series of small betrayals that added up. Behind the scenes, the friendship had long since turned transactional, with Elton providing resources and receiving silence in return. What looked like loyalty from the outside was, in truth, a slow unraveling of trust. As Elton steps away, the story becomes less about one man's generosity and more about how even deep-rooted bonds collapse when taken for never again. That's a phrase that quietly ends one of the most surprising celebrity friendships of the post-royal era. Elton John, a man known for loyalty that borders on stubbornness, reaches a breaking point with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. This isn't gossip pulled from thin air or social media exaggeration. This is a fallout from years of generosity being stretched past its limits, culminating in a moment that could have ended far worse than a fractured friendship. The final straw comes in the form of a private jet flight that goes wrong. Not a minor inconvenience. A dangerous crash landing caused by overloading and overuse of the aircraft. Elton's jet, something he had repeatedly made available to the Sussexes, was pushed beyond what it should have been. And when Elton learned just how routinely his plane had been used, not for emergencies but for convenience, the tone shifted from concern to anger. This wasn't about one flight. It was about a pattern. Vacations, media appearances, lifestyle travel. Over and over, Elton's jet was there, no questions asked. But that generosity came with trust, and trust was what finally cracked. For Elton, this wasn't just about safety or money. It was about respect and the realization that his kindness had become an
If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update.
To understand why this cut so deeply, you have to understand why Elton John was there for Harry in the first place. His bond with Princess Diana wasn't performative or distant. It was personal, emotional, and enduring. He wasn't just a famous friend. He was someone who grieved her publicly and privately, someone who felt a responsibility to protect her legacy and the people she loved. That loyalty didn't disappear when Diana did. It transferred, almost instinctively, to Prince Harry. When Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal life, Elton was one of the first to offer tangible support. Not advice from afar, but real help, resources, shelter, transportation, a safety net during a chaotic transition. For Elton, helping Harry wasn't transactional. It was emotional. It came from a place of memory and loss. But that also meant the betrayal hit harder. When loyalty is rooted in grief, exploitation doesn't feel careless. It feels personal. And once Elton began to feel that his connection to Diana was being used as leverage rather than honored, the foundation of the friendship started to. Behind the scenes, tensions had been building long before the jet incident. The Sussexes' lifestyle required constant movement, constant visibility, and constant access to luxury. And increasingly, that access came through Elton. His jet became a solution to logistical problems. His assets became extensions of their daily life. One detail symbolized the entire breakdown: a Range Rover that was loaned and never returned. On paper, it sounds minor. In reality, it represented something bigger: a failure to close the loop, a lack of accountability. Elton didn't lend that car as a gift. It was meant to be temporary. When it wasn't returned, it became another silent mark against him. This wasn't about money alone. Elton John has money. What he doesn't tolerate is being taken for granted. The missing car, combined with the jet overuse, painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Generosity had turned into entitlement, and gratitude had been replaced by. Prince Harry has been vocal about climate change, sustainability, and environmental responsibility. Those statements have followed him into interviews, speeches, and public initiatives. But actions matter, and the reality of frequent private jet travel told a different story. Elton John is also conscious of environmental impact. He offsets emissions and has been vocal about balancing luxury with responsibility. Watching his jet use repeatedly, often for non-essential travel, created a moral contradiction that he couldn't reconcile anymore. Supporting Harry's causes while enabling behavior that directly contradicted them became uncomfortable. This wasn't a quiet disagreement. It was a fundamental clash between public values and private behavior. For Elton, continuing to provide access to his jet felt like complicity, and once that realization settled in, pulling the plug became inevitable. Meghan Markle's role in this breakdown is inseparable from the broader lifestyle choices the couple made together. Post-royal life came with expensive expectations, high-end living, security costs, global travel, and media visibility. All of it required funding, and increasingly, support from powerful friends. As media ventures struggled to meet expectations and financial pressures mounted, reliance on borrowed assets grew. Elton's generosity filled gaps that commercial success didn't. Over time, that reliance shifted the power dynamic. What began as help started to resemble dependency. Elton reportedly felt that his kindness was being used to maintain an image rather than bridge a temporary gap. That distinction matters. Helping someone rebuild is one thing. Propping up an unsustainable lifestyle is another. And once that line was crossed, resentment, the fallout wasn't immediate or explosive. It was slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. Invitations stopped coming. Public appearances no longer overlapped. High-profile events went ahead without Harry and Meghan on the guest list. In celebrity circles, absence speaks louder than statements. Behind closed doors, frustrations leaked. Not dramatic confrontations, but quiet confirmations that the relationship had ended. Elton didn't make a spectacle of it. He didn't need to. His actions were clear enough. What once looked like an unbreakable alliance dissolved into distance. The man who had once opened his home and his jet closed that chapter without ceremony. And for Harry and Meghan, the loss wasn't just emotional. It was practical. This rupture also fed into a larger public narrative. The Sussexes' image, already under scrutiny, took another hit. Accusations of hypocrisy, entitlement, and ingratitude gained traction, not because of tabloid exaggeration, but because of repeated patterns. The contrast between stated values and lived reality became harder to defend. Environmental advocacy clashed with carbon-heavy travel. Financial independence clashed with reliance on wealthy benefactors. Each inconsistency added weight to the criticism. For observers, this wasn't about choosing sides. It was about accountability. When even longtime allies begin to step back, it raises questions that can't be dismissed as media bias. Elton John's decision to sever ties wasn't impulsive. It was a result of years of simmering tension, capped by a moment that put lives at risk. The overloaded jet wasn't just dangerous. It was symbolic, a sign that boundaries had been ignored for too long. By cutting off access and quietly distancing himself, Elton drew a line. Loyalty has limits. Generosity has conditions. And friendship, no matter how rooted in history or emotion, requires respect. This story isn't just about a jet or a car. It's about what happens when public virtue and private behavior collide, when gratitude is assumed instead of expressed, and when loyalty is mistaken for obligation. If you've been watching this unfold and have thoughts on where accountability begins and ends, let us know. Share your take. Join the conversation. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed and following. For Prince Harry, the end of this friendship stripped away one of the few personal alliances he had left that wasn't born of obligation. Elton John was more than a friend. He was a rare adult figure from Harry's past who didn't carry the baggage of palace politics or tabloid manipulation. And that meant something, especially after stepping back from the royal family. But relationships rooted in protection can't survive on nostalgia alone. Elton had always been a defender of Harry's humanity, but even defenders have their thresholds. Once it became clear that his help was enabling behavior rather than supporting growth, the relationship stalled. Not because Harry asked for too much once, but because he kept asking. There's only so many favors a person can extend before they start to feel like an ATM, jet trips, luxury cars, A-list access. Each request chipped away at the personal connection and layered on professional discomfort. Eventually, Elton stopped being a friend and started feeling like a resource. The optics of Meghan's public persona didn't help matters. Despite early public goodwill, her image became increasingly polarizing, especially among former allies. Her activism and media statements often leaned heavily into themes of empathy, equality, and ethical living. But behind the scenes, the financial reality was messier. The Sussexes' departure from royal duties had symbolic power, but it also came with real-world bills. Security costs, staff salaries, luxury rentals, all of it required money, and the couple's ventures into podcasting production and publishing hadn't generated the kind of stable revenue needed to sustain their lifestyle. As the pressure mounted, they leaned on people like Elton to fill the gaps. That tension between messaging and behavior is what accelerated the fallout. Elton wasn't judging the need for help. He was judging the expectation of it. He had extended himself generously, but generosity doesn't mean infinite access. The irony is that the Oprah interview, which was supposed to reclaim their narrative, only amplified the inconsistencies. Sitting in front of the world, telling a story of emotional abandonment and systemic cruelty, the Sussexes invited both sympathy and scrutiny. The problem? Public sympathy was thin when the lifestyle behind it contradicts the message. It's hard to preach vulnerability from a mansion, just like it's hard to talk about climate responsibility when your carbon footprint rivals that of a small country. Elton had defended them after that interview, even pushed back on tabloid overreach. But behind closed doors, the disconnect was becoming harder to ignore. People noticed. So did Elton. The cracks in the story widened, and what had once been a compassionate alliance started looking like brand alignment gone. There's also the question of visibility. The Sussexes didn't fade quietly into private life. They entered a different kind of public stage, one shaped by media deals, camera crews, and curated narratives. And that shift came with a cost. Living off the grid is one thing. Living in a Netflix docuseries is another. Elton had vouched for their sincerity, stood up for them when the backlash felt disproportionate. But as the camera angles sharpened and the storylines became more controlled, the authenticity he once defended became harder to stand behind. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Industry insiders began to speak cautiously about how hard the Sussexes were to work with. Demands, missed deadlines, creative differences, all of it stacked up. And in the middle of it was Elton, who had once helped open doors, now quietly watching those doors close. Back in the UK, the royal family stayed silent, at least publicly, but insiders made it clear that Elton's distancing didn't go unnoticed. After all, he had long been one of the few bridges between the institution and Harry. His support had made the couple's criticism sting less, because if Elton was backing them, it suggested legitimacy. Now, that safety net was gone, and with it, the few remaining threads of connection to allies who weren't tied to palace press offices or legacy obligations. Without Elton's loyalty, Harry and Meghan looked more isolated than ever. And in the court of public opinion, isolation can be fatal. People aren't looking for perfection, but they are looking for consistency. And when one of your most respected allies calls it quits, that says something no press release can. Diana's memory had always been the undercurrent of this dynamic. It was her name that anchored Harry's post-royal identity, and it was a friendship with Elton that made this entire alliance possible. She had trusted him with her heart, her privacy, and her reputation. For Elton, honoring that legacy had been a personal mission. Helping Harry wasn't about publicity. It was about keeping a promise. But at a certain point, that promise became blurred. Was he supporting Diana's son, or was he being used to keep a lifestyle alive? That's what hurt the most. Not the jet, not the car, but the realization that what had started as loyalty to Diana had become something she would have likely disapproved of, not because of scandal or rebellion, but because of the erosion of gratitude. Elton walked away not out of hatred, but out of grief, for the friendship he lost and the legacy he felt was being rewritten for personal gain. The exclusion of Harry and Meghan from recent events wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. Elton had always been a fixture at key social and philanthropic events, places where he once brought the Sussexes as guests, as signals of inclusion. Not anymore. Those invitations dried up, and with them, so did the illusion of unity. Elton didn't drag them publicly. He didn't need to. His absence said enough. In the entertainment world, absence is often louder than presence, and this absence was permanent. When asked, insiders simply say he's moved on. But it's not just about moving on. It's about accountability. Elton may be flamboyant on stage, but offstage, he's methodical. He doesn't burn bridges unless the foundation is already ashes. As for Harry and Meghan, the public narrative is no longer in their hands. Between the failed Spotify deal, the underwhelming Netflix releases, and the soft whispers of Hollywood disinterest, their once meteoric rise has slowed. Losing Elton isn't just about losing a jet or a favor. It's about losing credibility. He was a validator, someone whose support gave them depth in history. Without him, the shine dims, the question marks get louder, and the critics feel more emboldened. Friends fade, critics multiply, and in the court of celebrity, silence from allies is louder than any tabloid headline. The power of association is real, and losing someone like Elton John is more than a headline. It's a turning point. For Meghan, the perception of strategic alliances continues to haunt her public image. Every relationship is dissected, every friendship viewed through the lens of advantage. The end of this connection only fuels that narrative. Was it ever genuine? Did she see Elton as a mentor, or just a means of maintaining elite access? Those are the questions now swirling, and the lack of public repair attempts suggest the damage is permanent. She hasn't spoken on the fallout. Neither has Harry. But in the vacuum of silence, interpretations rush in, and most of them are unflattering. When a celebrity known for kindness and discretion walks away, it rarely ends well for the one left behind. Elton's final act in this drama is to do nothing. No statements. No rebuttals. Just a clean break. And in many ways, that's the most powerful move of all. No spectacle, no drama. Just a door quietly closed. In the end, the story isn't about a plane crash or a Range Rover. It's about the weight of expectations, the fragility of trust, and the limits of loyalty. When generosity is met with assumption, and advocacy is used as cover for contradiction, even the most loyal hearts reach their limit. When the Oprah interview aired, it felt like a cultural reset. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were no longer just ex-royals. They were symbols of resistance, independence, and emotional truth. At least, that's how they framed it. But in the months that followed, the glossy narrative began to peel. Behind the revelations and sweeping statements was a very real, very expensive life. The kind of life that required more than sympathy to maintain. Viewers saw raw vulnerability. Elton John saw logistical chaos. Because while the world was fixated on the sound bites, he was still loaning out jets and watching the receipts stack up. For Elton, it wasn't the emotional honesty that turned him off. It was the logistics of hypocrisy. And while Harry and Meghan opened up about pain and rejection, they left out one crucial detail: how they were managing to keep the high life going without the Crown's checkbook. Spoiler, they weren't doing it alone. In the eyes of some, Meghan's rise from Hollywood to royalty and back again was a modern fairy tale. But as the narrative shifted from aspirational to defensive, questions started multiplying. What was authentic and what was curated? What was principle and what was optics? The breakdown with Elton fed into that larger conversation. Her once stellar network of support was growing quieter. No more glowing endorsements, no public birthday tributes, no joint charity appearances. And in this world, silence is never neutral. It's a statement. Elton wasn't just any celebrity friend. He was a touchstone of British legacy, of Diana's memory, of musical and social credibility. Losing that connection doesn't just change your social calendar. It changes your story. And in Meghan's case, it reshaped the narrative entirely, from supported to Harry, for his part, has always leaned on emotional sincerity. His interviews, his memoir, even his documentaries, all frame him as a man trying to heal generational wounds. But sincerity doesn't erase accountability. And by the time Elton walked away, the contradictions were too big to ignore. You can't claim to be breaking cycles while flying private every other week. You can't advocate for mental health while leaving unresolved chaos in your wake. And you definitely can't call out privilege while living inside its most exclusive layers, courtesy of someone else's generosity. For Elton, it wasn't about holding Harry to a higher standard. It was about watching someone he cared about drift into a version of entitlement that Diana fought so hard to reject. Watching the son of his late friend lean on her memory while neglecting the responsibility that comes with it. That was a real deal breaker. And when Elton John cuts ties, it's never loud. It's final. That's the thing. He doesn't need a press conference to end a relationship. He simply steps back, stops returning calls, stops sending invites, and lets the silence do the heavy lifting. What started as a quiet boundary became a full-on statement. No jet, no car, no cozy cameos at charity galas. His message wasn't bitter. It was clear. Generosity is not a contract. It's a choice. And when that choice is abused, even the most loyal friend can walk away. There's a sadness to it, though. Elton never wanted a feud. He wanted a legacy to protect. But sometimes protection means closing the door to the people who won't protect it with you. And once that door shut, there was no coming back through it. Interestingly, the royals said nothing, not because they didn't notice, but because they didn't need to. Elton's quiet retreat said what they couldn't. This was no longer a matter of family politics. It was personal, and it was justified. In a strange twist, Elton's decision to pull back did what palace statements never could. It validated some of the public skepticism. It made the criticism feel less like tabloid spin and more like a hard truth. Even Elton, the ever-loyal, had seen enough. For the firm, this wasn't a win. It was just further confirmation that the fairy tale had curdled. The Sussexes weren't coming back, and the people who once bridged the gap were quietly burning their own connections to protect what was left of their... That's what makes this story so uniquely brutal. It's not about one fight or one fallout. It's about what happens when slow erosion replaces explosive scandal. When people don't storm out, they just stop showing up. Harry and Meghan still have their platform, but the stage feels lonelier. There are fewer allies standing beside them, fewer big names vouching for their intentions. And in celebrity politics, fewer means louder. The silence from Elton John is louder than any critic. People expect enemies to criticize. What hits harder is when friends stop speaking. And Elton didn't just stop speaking. He disappeared from the... That absence cuts deeper because of who brought them together. Diana's legacy loomed over every part of this friendship. She's the reason Elton opened his heart, and his jet hanger, she's the reason the public believed the bond was genuine. So when that bond broke, it felt like something sacred had been crossed. Diana's name carried weight, not just sentiment. And now, it carries an uncomfortable question. Would she have approved of what this relationship became? For Elton, the answer was no. And that, more than any headline, is what made him walk away. The message in all of this is less about celebrity drama and more about boundaries. Elton John didn't flip a switch. He set a line. And when that line was crossed, repeatedly, he stepped back. Not out of pettiness, out of principle. Friendship is a two-way street, and when one side becomes all demand and no return, the road runs out. Whether you're Team Sussex or not, this one stings. Because it's a reminder that even the most loyal people have their limits. Elton's silence isn't just personal, it's symbolic. And if Harry and Meghan want to rebuild what's left, it won't come from damage control. It'll come from owning the cracks. If you followed this saga all the way to the end, you've earned a say. Was Elton right to cut them off? Are the Sussexes misunderstood, or just out of touch? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who's been following the drama, and make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what falls apart next.